welcome to a new episode of the Gamer Talk podcast. Ryan Bullock is my guest today. Hey, Ryan, happy to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me here. Great to finally have this happen.
Yeah, it took a while. You live in the States, I live in Germany. It's we have a
Yeah,
time difference. We have a we have a job. It's hard to find the right time, but we finally made it.
yeah, no, absolutely. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to this one.
So Ryan, you are. I just went through your complete LinkedIn, and you are really a veteran in the games industry. Like you started out 2025, I see.
Yep.
Yeah, I was still in school back then, and I didn't know
Yeah,
what game development really is. I played games, but yeah. So
yeah,
tell me something
I
about it. How this did this all start out?
was, it's, well, it kind of started, with the story of kind of growing up with friends who were constantly in games and, meeting some pillars of the industry early on. And that kind of like, oh, well, wouldn't it be cool if, but in college, I went to school for international business and marketing.
Ugh.
And I ended up taking an art class as an elective, and then I was like, "Oh, that's
Hmm.
it. Like, I'm out." And I dropped out after 2 years and went to art school because I wanted to do character concept art and kind
Ah,
of learn
cool.
3D at the same time. It was at Art Institute, so you kind of do both.
Yeah, back
And
in
then
the
I
days.
did,
Yeah,
yeah,
same.
I did like more traditional school stuff part time while I was at Art Institute, and then
Hmm.
like that was it. And I kind of fell into my first job straight out of school at Zombie Studios, and kind of the rest is history. Um,
Hmm.
the It's kind of funny, like when you talk about the industry, everyone talks about the kind of serendipitous uh, circumstances, luck, and networking, and
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
the the lead who hired me at my first studio lived across the street from my grandmother
There you
and
go.
used to take her trash out for like on a weekly basis because she just couldn't do it herself. And he came in to give a presentation at school and kind of figured out that he had met my dad just without knowing like that he was coming into school. And
Hmm.
we kind of met each other, I think 3 or 4 months before I ever interviewed or graduated school. It just so happened that he was there at Zombie Studios as my hiring manager. And so that was kind of like my trip and fall into the game industry. Um,
Cool.
yeah, a little bit of networking, a little bit of luck.
So it has been kind of your friends group or your peer group that this kind of sparked from doing games. So all you not all your friends, but some friends have been working in it or
Uh,
started working in industry. How was this?
yeah. So my group of friends from middle school, the sixth, seventh, eighth grade, we all grew up playing games and networking, like LAN parties and stuff. And um, we all kind of started in the industry at the same time. I had a friend of mine start at old studio here in Seattle called Gas Powered Games, and then I got started at Zombie, and then another one started at Gas Powered, and then a friend of mine started at Bungie a long time ago and is still at Bungie. And
Crazy.
so I'd say, probably half of my friends group is involved in video games at some point. Um, and across the whole board, engineers, animators, artists, production, um, design. So yeah, we always joke around if one of us gets, disgustingly wealthy, we could just all drop our jobs and go form our own studio and just we'd have a studio of just friends. The 8 or 10 of us
That's
could,
fantastic if you think
which
about
would
it.
be great.
Yeah, yeah. So what I always wanted to know when speaking with people who have been in the games industry for a very long time is like how was it back then? Like how was the industry overall back then compared maybe to these days? Like how was how did you see like the art? How was everything in terms of development and how were the teams and yeah, it's always
it's
fascinating.
it's changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, clearly, I mean, you're involved as
Obviously,
well.
yeah,
I
yeah.
started my first job. We were working on Unreal 2X, so it was before normal maps really became a thing. And then like 4 or 5 months after I started, we got like the first drop of Unreal 3.
Mm-hmm.
And we started all kind of learning, and we all kind of went through our crazy bump phase and NVIDIA texture tools and converting black and whites to normal maps. Um, I'd say overall, like everything has gotten more, I'd say, production oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's such a yeah, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's become so much more of a complicated process to even get
Mm-hmm.
something out the door that it's almost a miracle that games ever ship.
Yeah.
Um, and when you have that sort of complexity in the development process, and not just from an artist's workflow, but from a pipeline development
Mm-hmm.
and getting builds and getting things automated and getting systems in place to the marketing and the biz dev, and that you need a production team on
Mm-hmm.
top of that to manage all of that. And so, like, when your complexity grows in one area, it increases the production management complexity. And now you have all these vectors of increasing complexity. And so, your support teams for the dev team uh,
Mm-hmm.
grow as well. And I think that's probably the biggest change that I've seen um, over the 20 years is it's not just like a simple, I mean, there's still indie games that can still throw things into an engine and kind of figure it out and go about their way. But anything,
Mm-hmm.
double A or triple A, it's like this huge, massive thing. And then on top of it, like look at all the platforms that you can ship on. Look at all the localization you have to do. Do
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
you know, back then it was, uh,
English.
I don't,
To
right. Well,
begin with.
yeah, I mean, there's so much. And, you know, the transition from physical media to digital has like
Mm-hmm.
democratized a lot of things as well, because when the Diablo 1 was like the big example, right? Like they would post a picture like, here's our gold master, we're done, and then you have to wait 4 months because they have to spin up God knows how many factories to print out all the CDs and then get them
Mm-hmm.
to retail stores, and then
Mm-hmm.
hope that when it's launched at a retail store, you can pick up a copy, or you need to wait for the next shipment to come in. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's so different now. There's so many different platforms that you can ship on, and you have to have the QA teams, and you have to have the teams in place to support those platforms as well. So I think, if anything, like the biggest change as a whole is just the complexity of it all and how it's become so
Mm.
much more of a production, more like a film
Yeah,
um,
yeah. Way more
type
people
production.
involved, and
Way more people.
which is necessary, right? If you wanna have these fully fleshed out games with high end graphics and gameplay and
Yeah,
animations, and you need these, yeah, these manpower and these, yeah,
yeah.
and
It's
you
it's
also need
it's
the production
ridiculous.
who's controlling it, right? Because then it's
Yeah,
development hell, I would say.
yep. And like, I mean, there's a whole. I mean, look at technical artists. Like their
Mm-hmm.
job is to, well, the portion of that job is to create tools just to get things into an engine that are compliant, technically and visually. It's you didn't have tech artists. I mean, you had artists who were technical, or you had engineers who were artistic, but you didn't have it. There was no technical art job
Yeah.
20 years ago. Um, and now it's, a good technical artist is worth, uh, is worth a lot of money in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah, yeah.
that's, that's kind of the place to be. It's like that bridge between art and tech. Um, and then the ever evolving tools. Yeah, it's a lot. So much has changed. Uh,
So
it,
what has changed for the better, you would say? Like, what are some things you would say have what was like really,
oh man,
like, I don't want to say negative back then, but like what has
I
been annoying back then, or was really a
yeah,
wall you hit, you know?
I think the biggest probably change was probably going from Photoshop to Painter. And
Mm-hmm.
it's funny
Mm-hmm.
because it's
Mm-hmm.
very specific and it's very kind of one dimensional as far as the industry goes. It's very like artist centric.
Yeah.
Um, but the fluidity and the kind of nebulous process now. I mean, I can create assets and I can go all the way to finished quality and then come all the way back to the high poly, redo a bake, change some things, and be right back to finished quality in Engine within like 10 or 15 minutes. You wouldn't be able to do that in Photoshop.
Mm.
So I think the painter, as far as artists go, it's really changed in how we texture things, and just having that immediate viewport for feedback is
Yeah.
huge.
Like, can
Is
you
huge. And
imagine texturing without a viewport now? Like, think about it.
no,
It's,
no, I
I,
like, and that's right. And there's times where I'll still use like those old Photoshop techniques. You run stylized edges on a normal
mm-hmm.
map, and then you
Yeah, yeah,
invert it, and that you get like a curvature, or you use the blue channel from the normal
yeah,
map
yeah.
as like a fake AO. And so yeah, there's sometimes where I'll still have to use those for some things, but I couldn't imagine doing that and not having, if you want to change your UV layout, okay, well now all of a sudden like all the edgeware work you did is null and void. Like you got to redo it.
Mm.
And it kind of with Quixel, like Endo and Dido, like that stage, was kind of a nice little bridge. But yeah, I couldn't imagine trying to do that again with the pipelines and the process that already takes a long time to create this stuff. Um, I can imagine going back to Photoshop.
Yeah.
And I think as an industry, I think, you know, there's probably a lot that has changed for the better. But I think the first couple of years I was in the industry, I was just kind of like wide eyed and uh, kind of focused on just what I was doing. And I didn't look at the industry much as a whole. It was
Mm.
very much like, this is my job. This is what I need to do on a day to day basis.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the
Um,
industry was not that big back then, right?
right. Right. Yeah, it is much different now, especially with, you know, yeah, social media and community
Mm.
platforms and things along those lines. Um, I'd say, I think there was the diversity angle, I think has definitely improved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's clearly still a lot of work that the industry needs to do, and I think there's a lot of maturing that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but, you know, my experience with the first couple years in the industry was like, you walk in and there's a whole bunch of white males.
Mm.
Every now and then you get, the female on, the production staff or secretary or something like that. Um, and now you're starting to see, you know, like Brenda, for example, right? Like,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
women and other folks are heading up studios, and you didn't really see that back then. And if it did happen back then, it wasn't necessarily out in the open, and you didn't necessarily see it. So I think that as a industry as a whole, I think that's a great move forward
Mm.
um, in that kind of maturing aspect.
Yeah. So is there something you would say, like the opposite question now, is there something you would say that would be cool to have this from back then now? You know what I mean? Like maybe it was the
Um,
inspiration or creativity, because now with Painter in place, you kind of are more like a work drone, I would say, because everything is automated, and it's it feels more like a craftsmanship and not more like a, an artist, you know.
yes, yes, and I can see that, and that kind of happens at different levels. Like the best example I can think of is Unreal 3. Like if you looked at a game that was built in Unreal 3, you knew it was Unreal 3. Like it just had a look to it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, and I think there is an aspect of those early days that the early days for me was not quite the early days for someone who started in the 70s and 80s,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that just like I have an idea and I want to do this and I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to do it. And that barrier to entry, like I don't know, I guess it can go both ways, right? So like the barrier to entry in the video games is probably less now than it was back then because it's easier to find resources.
Mm-hmm,
But at the
mm-hmm.
same time, like learning those resources and those tools is possibly more complex now and harder to do now.
Yeah,
Um,
the entry level
because
nowadays is really, really high.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's where, the indie stuff is always so great to see. Um, you can kind of see you can kind of see the jank. You can kind of see the unpolished nature of the graphics, and it's like, oh well, this could be better, that could be better, but it's just a group of people just like sitting down
Mm.
making the game that they want to the best of their ability. And I think that sort of, I guess, innocence is something
Yeah,
I wish
yeah.
you could bring back
Mm.
with today's tech, and without
Yeah.
it being overproduction, overmanaged, over marketed. Uh,
Yeah.
you know,
Maybe the games are taking themselves a bit too serious. Um, like back in the days, games have had this place to are just for fun and for like playing, and now I feel like they have marketed themselves a bit more into movies to here's the game, play it and be done with it. You know what I mean? Like more, it's hard to describe. Maybe you get what I'm about to
yeah,
say.
and the purpose of the game back then was for fun, and the
Exactly.
purpose
Yeah,
now
yeah.
is money and to make money.
Best example is the Assassin's Creed games. Like they
Yep.
they are here for one reason and one reason only. It's like to
Yeah.
launder money and to
Right,
yeah,
right. It's a money grab, and that's
yeah.
kind of driven a lot of things. And like you know, go back to the indie side, like you still see that kind of innocence and people just trying to do fun stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and you hope that they don't
Yeah,
get so
yeah.
demoralized, or they can make enough money to keep doing just the things that they love. Um,
And yeah,
yeah,
and this approach has been working for the past. When did this all start? 10 years maybe, and now people are more and more, or gamers are more and more aware what like the big companies are doing with you, like
hmm
season passes for single player games, time saving DLCs for Assassin's Creed games. And I think people are really now recognizing I don't want to do this anymore, and I want to have a video game again I can play and not just feel like I'm just a wallet for you know.
right, yeah,
And
and
this has
I
to
agree
change.
because yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I don't spend a lot of time playing games anymore, but I do try, on a weekly basis, and it's really kind of just feels gross when it's like the first thing I see is a cash shop,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah, yeah.
something along those lines, like, well, hey, try this. Like, oh, no,
Yeah. If you think
I
about it,
don't.
like you buy a game for $70, you install it, you open it up, and the first thing you're seeing is here's our DLC, here's our season pass. It's if you think about it, it's crazy. And
Yeah,
yeah.
and it's funny because I being on both sides, right? I am empathetic towards the developers. I
Yeah.
think in knowing like, wow, like,
Video games cost money,
do they
right?
really, yeah, like,
Yeah.
do they really need this to survive? Well,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, then I'm okay seeing this as a
Mm-hmm.
developer
Mm-hmm.
because this allows them to
Absolutely.
provide for their
Yeah, yeah.
families and their livelihoods. But as a gamer, it's kind of like, I don't think so. I don't want to pay $10 for this, or $15 for this. Or, I mean,
Yeah.
it's really not that much money when you think about it. But I just, like you said, I just spent $70. I don't want to spend more, as soon as I'm in the game. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I do see a lot of that, and I do empathize with developers who are in that situation, and I know that it probably rubs them the wrong way, and they don't want to do this, or I guess my first impression is like, man, they got strong armed by the
Mm.
publisher into putting something like this in, so the game has longer legs after release, and
Yeah.
you just kind of like, man, that's really really unfortunate sometimes.
So what are you playing then these days?
Oh man, I love like turn-based games, strategy games.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I grew up playing first person shooters, and I can't do them anymore. Like my reflexes are just too slow. I need to have a pause button. And like I got a wife and three kids. Like I like I
Yeah, I
can't
can
just sit there and
imagine.
focus in
Mhm.
on a game. I need a game with pause. So the biggest one I'm playing right now that I always return to is Darkest Dungeon.
Mhm.
Um, and
Cool.
then before that was Octopath Traveler, the first one.
Mhm.
Almost done with it. Um, but there's a lot of story to go through on that one.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and then of course, there's always like a XCOM there. That's always kind of floating around in the background. Like I love the XCOM franchise. I love the Civilization franchise. So I'm
Mhm.
really looking forward to Civ 7 coming out. Um, but yeah, Darkest Dungeon has been the one I think the past like 3 or 4 weeks that I've
Cool.
been playing the most. Yeah. Although, the new expansion for Diablo 4 just came out and my kids love that one. And so I just went through and bought a round of copies. And I think this weekend will be the first weekend. Like we all sit down and start
Oh,
our
that's
Diablo.
fantastic. That
Yeah.
sounds
Yeah. So it's,
fantastic.
yeah. And that's kind of fun because I remember when the first Diablo 1 demo came out and, I was at a friend's house and we were all kind of having a LAN party. And, at that point, everyone's on dial up. And,
Mhm.
we try to do like, oh my gosh, the Diablo 1 demo's out. And so we had like 10 computers all trying to download it at one point. And then it's like, okay, well, you're getting like 5 kilobits down. So everyone else, stop and, your computer will download and then we can just, transfer it to everyone else. And I think it took like 10 hours to download like, 100 meg demo, something like that.
Oof.
And now I'm like, well, I just, downloaded the expansion like 4 times. It's like 100 gigs, like whatever. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, so I think I'd say, I guess my gaming tastes are kind of varied, but I usually stay away from first person shooters unless it was something like a remake of Heretic or Hexen or something a little different.
Mhm.
Then I'd probably be purchasing that one. But like the Call of Duties and the Battlefields, like I can't do.
Speaking of Call of Duties, man, you worked at at Sledgehammer Games, so you did quite some weapons for Call of Duty.
Yeah, I came in on the last year of Advanced Warfare and then was there for the full production of World War II.
Have you worked
So
with
that
Dr. Disrespect?
alongside, like not directly.
Okay,
I
okay,
remember seeing him at Sledgehammer, but I
okay.
I didn't really have like a Twitch presence or anything like that. Like, so I didn't really know who he was.
Hmm.
Um, I
Yeah, I think he was a
from
level
my
designer. Yeah.
yes, yeah, he was a level designer, and I remember thinking in the interactions, probably I could count the interactions with him on one hand. Like
Okay. Yeah.
he was very very friendly, very outgoing. Um, you know, didn't really think anything of it. Like I didn't know who he was, so it's kind of like it's
Mm,
just this
mm,
really tall guy in a meeting. you
mm.
know, it
Cool.
was well spoken. Uh, but yeah,
So yeah, how was it at Sledgehammer Games? You have.
oh man, it was crazy. Because I'd come from my studio before that was a small indie studio. There
Hmm.
was like 20 of us in a room, and that included like the founders and the business guys.
Oof.
And so to get kind of pulled out of that into the the whole team, I think at Euphoria, which is the studio I was at, I think it was like 15 or 16 developers, and then support and everything after that. And then I come onto a team at Sledgehammer where the weapons team is like 6 or 7 people. So all of a sudden, like you're hyper focused. And you go from indie studio where you're kind of like, okay, well, I'm rigging, I'm doing some of the weighting, I'm doing some base animations if needed, kind of all over the place. I'm handling the outsourcing for some of our stuff while doing all the internal weapons to super hyper focused on just this weapon. And with
Mm.
Call of Duty, and at least at Sledgehammer, I'm sure it's the same at other like primary and support studios for the franchise. It's very much on rails. Like the tools are tested. Uh, the pipeline, everything is there, and you sit down day one and you just go. Um, and so it was probably the biggest increase in my career that I've seen in the quality of my artwork.
Mm.
Um, Not only being hyper focused, but working with the caliber of people, not just on the weapons team, but in the studio as well. And I've always kind of based my job changes around the caliber of people that I'm working with. I
Mm-hmm.
really don't care what game I'm on. It's the people, you know, not only to be able to learn from them, but to also be able to have them learn from me. Like, you know, I have something to offer to this team. So being able to work alongside those folks was pretty amazing. And I found out shortly after, shortly after working there, that I was replacing. I think his name was like Brian Burrell,
Mm-hmm.
who's a very accomplished artist in his own right. And I remember thinking, oh man, like I have some really big shoes to fill. Um, and then I was working. I was actually sitting right next to Ben Bolton, who you probably know is like a
Oh yeah.
fantastic artist himself. And so
Mm-hmm.
you're surrounded by like all these people who are just like really good, and you're all kind of in a pod together and just bouncing
Yeah,
ideas,
it's
and
like
you
a
look over
bubble,
and see,
right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's it's the best example of a bubble, and you
yep,
are in there and just fully grinding and focused on weapons all day
yes,
long, which is
yeah,
fantastic to
yeah,
grow,
yeah. I mean,
right?
it is, and the what was I going to say? I totally forgot. Oh, I mean, the weapons for Call of Duty are like it's a character themselves, and
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
everything is hyper focused. Everything is very like scrutinized. Certain dings on a weapon, are hand placed, and certain things are, it's like whatever's on the back of the stock out, we don't care. But this one thing right here, we're going to noodle for 2 or 3 days, and make sure the angle's right, or this detail here, we're going to get it just right. And, for advanced warfare, a lot of that was going back and forth with the concept team. And
Mm-hmm.
so you'd get like a rough concept from the concept team, and then you'd get that roughed in and into the engine, and then they'd go in and they'd get screenshots and they'd paint over it. You do another revision, and you look at it from all these different angles and make all these adjustments. And it was very collaborative back and forth with the concept art team, which
Mm-hmm.
was amazing as well. I'd never worked with that closely with the concept art team before. Uh, so that was like, they give you kind of like that kick and that push to really
Yeah.
collaborate, and it keeps you going when you're doing long hours, and you've been grinding on one weapon for 4, 6, 8 weeks sometimes, and you're tired of looking at it and
Crazy.
you want to move on to the next thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And then
Yeah.
World War II was totally
Oh
different.
yeah.
It's like you,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
you knew the weapons. You can't. There's no concept art needed
There's
really.
nothing to
Um,
to to add to it, right?
right. I mean, and you have like your skins, and you're like
Yeah.
how you
True.
can mix and
Mm-hmm.
match things, but it's mostly realistic stuff, and that's a totally different story because now, the bar. The bar is to make it as photoreal as you can,
Mm-hmm.
and that's you don't stop until you get there. Um, and those early days, for advanced warfare, we were still using Photoshop, uh, and then we didn't switch over to Painter until we started working on World War II. And so there was a lot of learnings with switching softwares, getting hardware upgraded. I remember the hardware that we had and the video cards that we had at the time just were crap for Painter. Like it just couldn't handle it. So everything was kind of like
Mm-hmm.
you had to work lower res. You had to be really simplistic in how you worked in Painter. Uh, you don't want to load it with generators. You don't want to do all this complex layering stuff like you can do now. Um, and so that first, 6 months of working on World War II, like I think I redid one of the weapons. I don't remember which one, but I redid it like 3 or 4 times, like the textures on it, because the engine gets upgraded. And like, okay, now I need to change this, and then new features and Painter come in, and then your
Yeah. Yeah.
eye changes. The better you get, your eye changes, and you go back and look at something, and you're like, oh man, like that doesn't look good anymore. I need to I need to redo this. Or oh man, this person just kicked out a killer weapon using this stuff. Okay, well now I need to redo mine to match the quality over there. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like this quality cold war that kind of happens at the beginning of that production cycle, where everyone is just like every new weapon that gets submitted just like pushes the quality bar higher and pushes it higher, and you need to keep up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's all in a good way, right? It's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
like inspiring,
Yeah.
very inspiring. So yeah, that was I think that. that phase of my career, like I would sometimes get so excited to go on the work the next day, where I'd have a hard time sleeping at night, and
It's crazy
you,
when you
you,
think about it,
you
right? It's
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, you're like, I got to
but
try to
it's
turn the brain off.
yeah, but it's also so cool, man. You spend so much time doing your job, and like if 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 the job is keeping you so motivated and you really want to do it all day long, like what else is there to do, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and if there wasn't a long commute on either side of that job, I probably would have spent more hours there, just because it was fun. Um, you especially with the part of the process, like I'm not a big fan of like modeling. Like I really don't like that phase very much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've gotten I've gotten to like it more because I've been using ZBrush a lot more and doing more organic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I like materials for me is where it really starts to come alive. And so once I get through like the high poly and low poly and everything, and as soon as I start doing the bakes, that's when like I can feel like that. All right, no, let's
Now
do
we're
this
getting
because you're
started.
all these stages of the process are all separate. They're all siloed. And
Yeah.
then bakes are is when it all starts to come together. Like
Mm-hmm.
all the effort into edge width, all the effort in the high poly, all the scrutinizing the UV space and setting up your edges and everything, and in the low poly, making sure the silhouette is solid.
Mm.
Like it's the first time all that work starts to pay off. And if you've done your due diligence in all of those stages, like that first bake is like, yes,
Ah.
okay, here we go. Like
Yeah.
now I'm
Yeah.
off and running. Like it's no longer a marathon, now it's a sprint.
Mm.
Um, and that's where it's like it's so fast. It's so much fun to kind of see it come alive, and it just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it
And
gets more and more polished every day you work on it.
the excitement kind of builds up to a point. I
Yes. Yep.
finished this high poly now. I got my UVs done. I can't wait to
Yep.
finally bake it, and then it all
Yep.
comes down, and you hit the bake button. The first bake is not always good, but when it's good, it's like whoa.
Yeah. It's like okay, and that's usually the first time you can kind of start to see the final product. At least for me, it's kind of like okay, now I can start to see this come together. And you can, as I've gotten better, I've started to see that earlier on in like the high poly. But it's not until I start to see the materials that I can really start to visualize the quality level that I want to see.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's oh gosh, what was I going to say about that? I don't know. Maybe it's the same with you, but to me, once I get to materials, it's like a yes or no process. It's like, did I make the
Mm-hmm.
right mark? Yep. And it's not like it's not a rational thing for me. Like I feel it. I feel it in my chest. And
Mm-hmm.
there's like this little like blip of excitement when like that value change is correct, or when the
Yeah, yeah,
hue
yeah.
is right on the
You,
color. And
you
so
get
it's
a
like this very
feeling.
like
Yeah, yeah.
intrinsic, like instinctual sort of process. Whereas with modeling, it's very like technical to me.
There is, yeah, with modeling there is a wrong or right approach, and
Mhm.
yeah,
And the
yeah.
materials for me is a little more exploratory.
Mm.
Like, okay, do I really want this that dark? Do I yeah,
Mm.
it's not quite so rigid, and you're kind of needing to find the path to the final product or the final visual. Um, yeah, it's fun. Unfortunately, I don't get to do it as much for my job these days, but uh,
Yeah, yeah.
it's
Do
still
you
fun
miss
to.
it? Do you miss it,
Yes,
or are you
very
doing it in
very.
your free time?
I do it in my free time every now and then. Like if I have like 15 minutes in between meetings, I'll try to do something real quick. Like I got the Cintiq sitting in front of me, and I've always got the programs kind of open and ready to go. And so when I have a free couple of minutes, I'll try to kick out something. And so
That's cool.
usually like my portfolio work is, at least recently, it's all usually like smaller projects, and it's like I could probably finish them all in one day, but it usually takes 3 or 4 weeks to do because I don't have as much time. Um, but it's been kind of nice getting out of like that weapons mindset over the past couple of years, and just being able to do whatever I think feels cool and what I want to do. And it's kind of forced me to learn new tools and learn new techniques and learn a different way of approaching assets.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think by the time you go through, the Call of Duty cycle, you pretty much know how you're going to work. Your workflow is pretty entrenched, and it takes a lot to get out of that kind of rut of doing the same motions and the same things for the same assets over and over again. Uh, and so I've been diving more into character work, and like armor and stuff like that. And so looking and learning the character side of things has been kind of a breath of fresh air for the for the career, I think. Even though
Mm-hmm.
like it's all been personal stuff, but um, definitely makes you learn new things and approach things differently. And of course, there's always new tools that you learn that you can apply back to the old loves of weapons. Like, man, if I would have known this 5 years ago, it would have been so much easier to create this weapon. Or,
Oh yeah.
if I would have had this technique, it would have been so much. Like, why did I bother doing it this way? I should have done it this way. Or, all those things that you learn by pushing out of the comfort zone.
So you worked on two Call of Duties,
Yeah. Yep.
and what
Yeah.
did happen then? Like, what did you decide to move away from it?
I think, after I think I was at Sledgehammer for 4 years, 4.5 years, something along those lines. And we had just, we had just kind of did Gold Master on World War II. And I got a
Mm-hmm.
call from someone at Apple. Like I didn't reach out to Apple. They contacted me and they're like, "Hey, we need a hard surface artist. Would you be willing to talk to us?" And it's like, well, you know,
Which is pretty rare, right?
yeah,
A hard surface
yeah,
artist at Apple,
yeah, yeah.
because
It's
you don't need weapons at Apple.
that's well, that was one of the funny things. Like during my interview there, like all I really had was weapons to show.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were
Mm-hmm.
some things that were kind of older that I could show, and life was too busy at that time to try to create something new just for the interview process.
Mm-hmm.
So I can only imagine what people thought when they were walking by the interview room when there's this guy just showing, a whole bunch of pretty much advanced warfare weapons.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like the opposite side of Apple,
Yeah, yeah.
or opposite from what
Apple
Apple,
Apple
believes
is the
in.
clean and clean
Yeah.
aesthetics, minimalistic.
I'm like
Yeah.
grunge and rust. Come on, let's put more
Mm-hmm.
rust into this.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
but yeah, I kind of went through the process, and the more we talked about it, the more it was kind of. I think it was intriguing just because it was something new and it was a different platform and it was a different. I think at that point I think I was kind of burned out on weapons.
Yeah,
Um,
understandable.
it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, I've been doing weapons for got 10 years. Um, yeah, I don't want to be a 60-year-old weapons artist, if
Mm-hmm.
I'm still doing artwork when I'm 60. And so I think I felt like it was time to just try something different. And if it didn't work out, well, I could always go back to games. Not a big deal. Um, and so I remember accepting Apple's offer the day World War II came out. And so it was like this really kind of weird day where, the studio was celebrating, like we had, food and drinks and everything. And
Mm-hmm.
knowing that I was leaving in a couple months, but I hadn't told anyone.
Ugh.
Um, so it was kind of a weird, like, feeling. Um, but, Apple is when a company like that, and there's numerous companies, like if they reach out to you, like you have the conversation and just see what they're offering. And
Mm-hmm.
Apple was one of those. Like, yeah, I wasn't looking to leave Sledgehammer. Like I was pretty happy with doing what I was doing, and it was great for getting better as an artist. And of course, there's always the bonuses from shipping that you got to stick around for. And I wanted to get the World War II bonus, um, but okay, Apple's calling. All right, I'll have the conversation. The more I spoke, and the thing that stuck out the most was the caliber of people that they were hiring.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people who had been in VFX and film for like 30, 40 years. Like it was so it's a quick, fun one. The when you start working at Apple, there's like onboarding and orientation, and it usually lasts a couple of days. And they have like all these pre-recorded videos from certain people in the organization. And one of the guys that was talking had just kind of like this air about himself. And he was older. He was probably in his 60s or 70s. And there are certain people when they talk, like their voice just kind of reverberates and like they're just acoustically, they're just very, comforting to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
And his his voice was. And I remember kind of searching his name and finding out who it was and realizing that, oh my gosh, this guy's name is Tom uh, Tom something, or I don't remember, but he was the creator of THX. Like
What?
Tom Holman, I think his name was Tom
Mm-hmm.
Holman. And so when you go to a theater and you see that like that, like he was the guy who
What is
did that.
what is this actually doing? Is this like a production company or is it?
No, this was at Apple, and so this was an employee at Apple, and his background was sound design for film, and
Mm-hmm.
he had I think patents out there for like Dolby Digital, like surround sound stuff and like
Gotcha.
that, and he had
Gotcha.
coined it THX, Tom Holman Experience,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was kind of like the caliber of people that Apple was hiring. And it's like, okay, I want to work there. Not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. And the funny thing is, like, I didn't know what I'd be doing. Like, I knew I was part of, TDG, which is Technology Development Group, but they can't talk about what I was going to be hired to do because it was so secure at the time, which, clearly like now it was Vision
Mm-hmm.
Pro, right? The VR headset. Um, and so, you kind of go in day one, you're like, oh, this is what I'm working on. All right, all right, all right. This is kind of cool. This is a different aspect that's bolted onto the career that now I could say I've gone and done this. And of course, Apple is totally different to a game studio in so many ways. Like the intensity, the scrutiny, the quality bar. Um, if you think about how Call of Duty scrutinized over the weapons and everything that was right in front of the screen, it's like
Mm-hmm.
that over everything. Um, and so it's
Every
very,
button,
very, yeah, yes,
every
it's
design.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Every pixel is scrutinized 10 times over before it ever gets released.
Yeah.
We've got people on the team who there's a lot of ILM and Lucasfilm folks, so a lot of Star Wars, a lot of film, and then on the game side, like there's a lot of Naughty Dog, a lot of high end AAA folks there.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the challenges at Apple was teaching and kind of educating certain elements of Apple what real time 3D was
Mm-hmm.
and how important it is, because there was no concept of really 3D and how to get
Mm-hmm.
it to work on a platform that was unknown, that we didn't
Mm-hmm.
know the technical limitations for. A lot of the engineering team that had been at Apple for a while only dealt in 2D, and so there's no idea of draw calls or frame rates, and everything is measured in uh, thermal load. How hot is this device going to get, and is it going to
Mm-hmm.
trigger a shutdown or like
Mm-hmm.
a power cycle? Um, you know, Power draw is a big one. Because everything is a battery, like it's not plugged in.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, yeah,
so,
I see.
kind of bridging that gap, not only between like the real time people and the film people, but then the engineering team who is also trying to learn uh, what 3D actually is
Mm.
in regards to this platform. And so that I think was always kind of like the biggest struggle, because you'd get people throwing in, 1 or 2 million poly model with, 8, 10, 12, 16K textures. And they're like, well, why is it not running? So,
Mm-hmm.
well, first of all, you
There
got
are
like a
some
40 inch
reasons.
file. There are some reasons there. Um, and, so you try to take all this stuff and condense it down to super, super tight technical
Mm-hmm.
restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
And then you try to explain why it takes so long to do the things that we do. It's like, well, because this is a process, guys. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is not easy. It'd be easier for me to make a game level by myself than it is would be to do this.
So,
Uh,
what did you end up doing? Like, what was your day-to-day business? Like, have you still been
my
doing 3D objects, or have
my
you just
yeah.
been
So the
more
first
like
like
a mentor?
So I made a switch about 2 years in. So my first 2 years at Apple, I was IC, so individual contributor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and just whatever projects or internal efforts were going on, if they needed an artist, that's what I would help out with. And at that stage of where the org was, it was a lot of exploratory and prototype work. So it was a lot of, it doesn't need to be pretty. We just need it set up and out. And in fact, my actual title was technical artist.
Mm-hmm.
And I am probably like the least technical artist there. Like, I'm just like, I just play with pixels and verts. Like, I don't know any of this
Mm-hmm.
other stuff. Um, and then about a year and a half, like I kind of started taking on kind of more just responsibility, just generally as far as production goes, and was kind of asset review for external development. Um, and then started just having people kind of, well, okay, well, Ryan, what would you do? What do you do in this situation? Okay, well, this or that. And then finally, I think it was like right before the pandemic started, like 2019. I made the switch to being more like production oriented, um, and then was officially moved from IC to like manager. I think a year after that. And so no, I don't get to do as much anymore. As far as artwork goes, I've got a team of like 8 artists that I work with, um, spread across God knows how many projects at any given point.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, now it's a lot of kind of managing the day to day, the scheduling, the tasking, the bidding, resource capacity type things, um, and everything else that comes along with being a manager at a big company. So it's
Yeah.
performance reviews and making sure people have hardware and being distributed. It's not always like the easiest thing to do. I've got people, I've got half the teams in Seattle, half the teams in California, and then folks over in Germany and possibly Spain. um, and so yeah, it's a lot of my days are just Tetris on the meeting calendar and just trying to find ways
Yeah.
to make sure I have enough
Yeah.
time with everyone. And then,
As we said in the beginning, right?
yeah, it's all
We
just the
all.
meeting Tetris most of the time. I think that's like half my job these days.
So you became a meeting artist.
Yes, yes, very, very much so. Um, but it's always been kind of a part of my career that I've always kind of enjoyed, um, the planning of it and
Mm-hmm.
the scheduling and looking forward. And I've always done that personally for whatever I was tasked with. Like, no, a sledgehammer is like, hey, like here's your next like 4 weapons you need to work on. Okay, well that's like 6 months of work or whatever. Um, and I would always enjoy like, okay, I'm gonna spend the next 2 weeks on the high poly and then a week here and
Mm-hmm.
this, and I should be have it done here.
Planning ahead and
Um, and I
yeah.
always kind of liked that aspect of it. And I think that's probably why I went into business in college in the first place, um, was for like the managing. Um, and so like being able to do that kind of scratches that itch.
Mm-hmm.
Um, although I can't say like I enjoy work like I did as an artist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but every now and then, you get those projects that come in. You're like, okay, I can help out with this one. This is cool.
Mm.
Like I can do this. I know
Mm-hmm.
I can do this one, without slowing down the production. So I do look forward to those, and I do get like 1 or 2 of those a year where I can spend a week on something and then hand it off either for polish or if I can take it to a finished state, then even better. But yeah, I definitely do miss uh, the IC side of it and the art side of it.
Is there something you could take away from games into that like benefited you from Apple? You already said, yeah, you did some planning ahead, and like this is something you do now. But is there something else you would say that really helped me in the games industry now at Apple?
Yeah, specifically like the optimization side of things for real time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a hard skill that is definitely applicable to anything AR and VR related,
Yeah, it's still
and
not
not
that
specifically
performant,
Apple. Yeah,
like
with
like it is with games.
right. As far as like specific Apple things, uh, that's if there's any one way to survive at Apple, it's going to be soft skills. It's going to be your willingness to reach out and network within Apple
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
build those working relationships with not only like the people within your immediate, work sphere, um, but also outside of your group or your immediate org. And Apple has many orgs, right? There's like, my big org that I'm in, and then underneath that there's this person's org, then underneath that there's this person's org, then underneath that there's this
Mm-hmm.
person's org. And so being able to kind of get your sea legs under you and know who is running what org, what those people do, and being able to reach out to them and build that kind of relationship to work with them and to find work, sometimes even for yourself, uh,
Mm-hmm.
is probably the biggest. Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing for Apple. Um, Not necessarily the easiest thing to do, especially if you're like me, if you're an introvert. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, that being just someone who can reach out and is easy to work with, I think more so than anything else. Um,
Was this hard for you to
it's,
learn at Apple,
um,
especially remotely? Like it's always a bit harder when you work
I
remotely and
Well, the first 2 years I was on site, so I was actually down in San
I gotcha,
Francisco on
gotcha,
site. So yeah, this was all
gotcha.
before because I started working at Apple in 2018. So we were
Mm,
all
okay, understood.
5 days a week. Um, so it was a little bit easier there. I think I was lucky enough to where I joined early enough to where it's still kind of a small team, um, and so it was kind of easy to get to know who's doing what. Um, and then as the org grew, I think it probably got harder to come into. And for like the folks that I've hired in the past 2 years, I think it's probably more difficult, especially being remote. And so you can't accept. It's not as easy to expand, um, your group or your communication group right now. But it was difficult because you kind of come into this and it's kind of a platform and a company that you're not necessarily familiar with. You don't know how
Mm,
it works. Apple is organized very differently from any other company I've worked for.
okay.
Um, it's not organized necessarily by product. It's more
Mm,
organized by discipline. So if you're, like to say, I guess the good way of putting it, like if you were, a hard surface artist for, say, Activision or Microsoft, right?
mm,
You're not necessarily working on Halo. You can be working on Halo and Call of Duty and all these other properties at any given point. So if you're
mm,
like the screen specialist or the LC or the LED display specialist, like you're not necessarily just working on iPad. You're working on an iPad, iPhone. You can be working on anything at any
mm,
given point. Um, and that's where like that kind of flexibility comes in and being able to work with a diverse set of people because you might come into this and you are the only artist working with a group of 20 people who don't necessarily know what is involved with making 3D. You kind of working at a game studio, you kind of take it for granted that if you go talk to an engineer, you go talk to an animator, like they have some sort of idea of
mm,
what you do and the importance of it. Um, Whereas with Apple, especially those early days, like they didn't have any idea what was needed for a technically compliant and performant asset. And you'd have to argue and you'd have to say, well, why this is why you need this. And if the quality bar isn't what they're expecting, you need to be able to stand up and say, well, because you're going to fry
mm,
whatever you're trying to run this on. It's not going
mm,
to run. It's going to hit thermal load after 2 minutes and it's going to shut down. Um,
mm,
and so there was the work wasn't the work wasn't the most challenging aspect. It was I hate to say education, but it was the learning how to work with folks that were essentially like they just didn't know. And so you have to explain it, and then you have to explain why things take as long as they do. Because when they look at something, they kind of assume that it was just all a 2D image. not knowing that, like, no, it's one thing to paint a 2D image. It's a whole other thing to build a 3D scene that looks like a 2D image. And it's a lot longer. And even now, like 7 years in, we're still having to explain why things take 5, 6 months to do. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, let me show you the pipeline, like,
Mm-hmm.
or the parts of it. Um, so yeah, it was difficult. It was difficult at first. I think the average tenure at a tech company is like 1.5 years. And so if you hit like the 3 year mark, then you're doing pretty good for a tech company. I
Oh,
think Apple's a
gotcha.
little bit higher than that, but you know,
Mm.
it pays well. So and that
Yeah,
that was the other thing. Like going from Sledgehammer to Apple, like my pay doubled easily the
I can
first year.
imagine. I saw
Um,
some positions at Apple, and they are adding there's a salary also included in the position. And
mhm.
looking at that, you're like, "Ooh,
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
there is not any game studio out there that will ever be able to play this."
no,
Um,
no.
um,
And I guess that's one of the big things that has changed recently. Like I have started to notice salaries creep up.
mhm.
And over the past like 3 or 4 years, I've interviewed at different companies if they reach out. It doesn't cost me any money to have the conversation. And their salaries have gotten close.
Mhm.
Um, I think the highest one I was that was kind of talked about was like 170, 175 for a weapons artist. Um,
Ooh.
and I was like, okay, that's in California, you're doing okay in California.
Yeah, California has to be treated
um,
definitely different because yeah, there are like
right,
mortgage and stuff is super high
right.
and cost of living
But
is on another level. But yeah,
right, but like everything else that working, and it's not just Apple, but it's tech companies in general. Everything is offered after that. Usually there's stock involved.
stock
After like
options and stuff.
I make more in stock on a yearly basis than I did at Sledgehammer salary, like total compensation. So like
Cool.
one portion of my total compensation at Apple is already more than my total compensation at Sledgehammer. Um, yeah, and yeah, like it's ridiculous.
Uh,
Like I see salaries now for
mm-hmm.
pretty good companies, and I'm like, oh, they pay this much. I was like, I would love to work for that company. Wow, like I pay more in taxes than what they would pay me in salary. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
maybe maybe I can maybe I should stay where I'm at. maybe,
Yeah,
maybe I just retire early.
yeah,
Maybe I'll be able to retire here in like 5 or 6 years and then just go live the indie game dev life and just sit with the
yeah.
small
Come
team
back to
of
games,
people.
kind of,
Yeah.
huh? Make
Uh-huh. You,
make a game studio with your friends, as you already said, huh?
you know, there's I've my kids are always like, well, what would you do if you won the lottery? First of all, I'd you know
That's
colleges,
a
taking
good.
care of houses, taking,
Yeah,
family,
yeah,
like my
yeah.
parents would take all those things. But then I would take all that money and I would just start a game studio and I would hire all my friends. I'd be like, here's, $200,000 a year. I don't care if you guys make anything that ever releases, have fun. Like if it
Mm.
releases and you make money off it, great. If not, as long as you're having fun, just make whatever comes in. If you want to do a 3 month mobile game, do that. If you want to do a 5 year like crazy AAA game, do that. I don't care. I'm just going to pay you a ton of money. We'll have insurance. We'll do everything. And it would just be, a small group of friends making games and well paid. And I think that would be the best.
What game would you make?
Oh man. You, as much as long as I've been in this industry, I've never worked on like a fantasy or anything outside of, I've done like sci-fi and I've done realistic. And so I would love to do something like dark fantasy.
Uh
Um,
huh.
I love the mortal shell visual aspect. So something kind of dark like that. Um, I, you know, I'm horrible at the Dark Souls games, but I do love their visual style. And so I probably want to do something with that visual look, but something that's like turn based in strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like I played War Tales for a long time. I don't know if you played that one.
No,
Um,
I didn't.
but it's kind of like a turn-based strategy type game and fantasy-based. But every weapon that you put on, you see it change on the character. And so something along those lines where you can go really deep into like seeing all the loot that you get,
Mm-hmm.
and you can really like have a lot of fun with it, all the design aspects and the details and everything, but just in a kind of like a uh, turn-based game would be so much fun.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's I think that would be my number one. Um, yeah, I mean, there's certain artists that I see the work. I'm like, yeah, I'd make a game with that style. Um, like I
Yeah.
was just looking
Yeah.
at his what's Andres Rio. I think I was looking at his stuff the other day, and I was like, man, yeah, like that, just like that dark, like almost like macabre kind of
Mm-hmm.
feel that I'd love to explore in a game. Yeah,
Cool.
just it's just got to be like dripping with tone and
Yeah.
style, and I think that's why I
So
like
many
Darkest Dungeon.
possibilities.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, and I think that's why I like Darkest Dungeon too. It's like that the look and the style of it is just like everything from the sound design to the gameplay, like everything just oozes, and I think that storytelling aspect of it comes through in the visuals, it comes through in the audio, it comes through in the gameplay. And I
Mm-hmm.
think trying to align all those elements in a game is super hard to do, and they nailed it.
Yeah, and you really can
And
feel it as a player when they nailed it.
yes,
Like
yeah.
Hades has been one of the games for me. Um,
Which one?
where Hades, Hades. It's
Hades. Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hades.
Yep,
It's German. It's a German word, but Hades. Yeah,
yep,
Hades has been the
yep.
last game that was like really the music, the everything fits so well together, and it doesn't need to be the perfect graphics. I think it's just the right balance between every aspect of the game
Yes,
that
yeah.
needs to work
And
out.
yeah, if everything's at like 70-80%, and they're all on the same page, like you got yourself a winner. It doesn't need to
That's
be
enough.
doesn't need to be perfect.
That's
Yeah,
enough.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think the I keep kind of talking about it, but like the original Diablo was the same way. Like it's pixel graphics. It didn't look all that great compared to today's standards, but the sound, the feeling of walking through like that unknown dread that you would
Mm.
get walking through this, the first initial levels, like the first time you meet the butcher, like
Mm.
those
Mm.
moments, like you remember those, and that's kind of you don't always get that in video
Yeah.
games. Um, it's a hard thing to capture, and it's a hard thing to to pull off, especially with team sizes and trying to get everyone on the same page.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah. As
yeah,
we already said,
yeah,
teams are so big. It's hard to get everyone on the same page. To get every person have the same vision for the game. Yeah.
yeah, yep, yeah, absolutely. So I mean, like, what if you were to make a dream game, what would you do?
Oh, that's a good question.
Has anyone
Man,
asked you that?
not yet. I was a huge fan of like those fast-paced first-person shooters.
Hmm.
Like really small levels. Like my favorite one was
Yes.
Black Ops 2 or 3, for example. Um, no skill-based matchmaking, which has been draw really daunting in the last few years. Like
Hmm.
the gaming sessions feel so like before skill-based matchmaking you had cool sessions, a really bad session, cool session, you get better, you have way more cooler sessions. And with skill-based matchmaking, especially when you have a low time to kill, um,
Yep.
everything feels so bland, and everything has the same, like you always have the same KD ratio. Like you play against players that are play like you, and every session feels the same.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
but yeah, I can also understand when you started out as like playing a new game, you will get destroyed if you don't have
Yep.
skill-based matchmaking, right?
Yeah.
But that's the way it is. Like everyone started out playing video games, and everyone got
Yeah.
destroyed in the beginning. And if the game is well made, you continue to play and you continue to learn, like the dynamics of the game, how do certain weapons work, what attachments do I need to use, how is my play style. You get better over time, and
Yep.
with like skill based matchmaking, this gets completely lost. And yeah, this is my approach to it. Um,
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to like the level design that those early days of playing a game, you have to learn levels and the rotations and everything that
mm-hmm,
goes on. And
mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm,
mean, the last like the last game, probably fast-paced shooter that I played seriously was probably one of the Quake games, like Quake
mm-hmm,
3 or something. I played a
mm-hmm.
ton of Quake 3 growing up. And that was, small levels, like 18 people all on level just duking it out. And, like you, your matchmaking was trying to find the server that had the lowest ping.
Mm-hmm.
If you get like lower than 300 ping, you're like, all right, I'm going to hang out on this server, and you
Yeah,
know
yeah.
and you just kind of go from there. Yeah, yeah. That was the last, I think, shooter that I played seriously. I mean, I played Advanced Warfare and Call of Duty during playtests and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
um, nothing like the early days. That was pretty much all I played. So
Cool. Yeah.
yeah. Hmm. So, but okay, I don't know if you answered my question though.
Oh yeah.
If you were making, I mean, it would probably be. I mean, like,
I would be
would it
like, I
be?
would just make a solid first person shooter that hits all the, like, I'm really missing out on a good first person shooter now that is hitting all the marks that made me fall in love with first person shooters.
Okay? So
Yeah.
is it like? I mean, do you like the modern stuff? Do you like the
Yeah, I
futuristic? The
yeah, I would say the modern stuff is, but it needs to find the right mark between modern and, like, I was not a big fan of the Advanced Warfare and
Mhm.
like, was it Infinite Warfare? Yeah, it was
Yeah,
not, it was too futuristic for me. But yeah, I would say a modern shooter that is really well made, doesn't need to have the highest graphic, but it should just make fun again.
yes,
Um, yeah,
yeah. Um, do you like the do you like more arcade type shooters, or do you
yeah,
like the ones that have
absolutely.
like the bullet drop and are a little bit more
Arcadey.
technical?
Yeah,
Arcadey,
uh,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Did you do a lot of Team Fortress? Do you like the style of like
Uh,
games like that, where it's kind of skill or class based?
yeah, I played lots of Battlefield 5 and Battlefield 1, which I wouldn't consider arcadey, but it is kind in a way. Yeah, and Battlefield Bad Company. Oh, I love those. I love those.
I think the last Battlefield I played was Battlefield 2 demo. Like I think when it first came out, like 15. I don't even know how long it was. I had a ton of fun with it, and I was always really frustrated though because I couldn't ever fly anything in the game. Like I just couldn't grok the controls for some reason.
Hmm.
Um, Even though I wanted to just be able to fly around and shoot things. Um,
Yeah,
and yeah, I
like
couldn't do it.
coming
Couldn't
back to
do
the
it.
basics would be pretty cool for some
Yep.
franchises.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's like I don't know how much you can talk about, but I know Romero Games is doing Unreal 5. So is it kind of a throwback to some of the original, like the
Hmm.
kind of original vein of shooter? If you can say, totally understand if
Yeah.
you can't.
Yeah, I didn't. I was never really playing Counter Strike. Maybe I was too young at that stage. I also, it was
No.
always mouse and keyboard, and I was always
Yeah.
playing on consoles. So
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, I think I'm
yeah,
the opposite. Like me on a controller just my brain just doesn't do it. I gotta have mouse and keyboard uh,
yeah,
for first person shooters.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it stuff makes me dizzy now. I'm getting too old.
Yeah, I kind of feel it creeping on to me as well. Like, I'm not that fast as I was when it comes to reaction speed. So I think it's starting to be, it's beginning now for me as well. Hitting
Yeah,
30, it's like I'm not 18 anymore when I was like, do, 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 do,
oh yeah,
like a
boom, you were just
robot.
there. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
and now I'm like, oh, there are kids out there that are doing this all day long, like I did. And
Yeah, I mean, I've gone, I'm 43 now
hmm
and just can't. Yeah, I see like, my two youngest kids are like huge into Elden Ring right now, and they're like on like a new game like 3 or 4, and like I tried playing like the intro, and I'm like, I do, like, I get like 20 minutes into the game, and I'm like, all right, I got to go back to my turn-based games where I can think about what I need to do. My
yeah,
the
I
brain
wanted
hand
to try it
connection just
out.
isn't there. Yeah,
Yeah, I wanted to
that
try
you
out
want to try
Elden
it out.
Ring.
And
Yeah.
it's a beautiful game, absolutely beautiful
hmm
game. I enjoy, and it's one of those games that I just enjoy watching. I'll throw up a Twitch stream of it, and especially when it first came out, like I'll sit there and like listen to it. But when my kids are playing, like I'll sit on the couch with my coffee and like, oh, what's that? What's that? What's that? And they're like, oh, well, I'm going to do this, and I don't understand, anything about what they're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're excited, and it's a fun game to watch. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Alrighty, Ryan.
well,
I think we could
yeah.
wrap it up. I say
Oh
thank you
my
so
gosh, it's
much.
10:30 already. Yeah,
It's
that's
time really went flew.
yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much.
God, yeah, absolutely.
I will link your portfolio. Do you have a website or something?
Just
No.
ArtStation is good.
Okay.
Yeah,
That should be
yeah,
fine. I
yeah.
will
And
link
it's
everything, and yeah, I thank you so much for being my guest today. I think you gave an amazing insight of game dev back in the days and how things have changed for you coming to Apple. And
yeah.
yeah,
There's a lot of changes. Well, I
mm,
appreciate you having me on, and happy to do this again. And
yeah, definitely. We should do this
it's a
again
nice
more.
break. It's a nice break
Yeah,
in the middle of the grind for sure to
yeah,
chat
cool.
shop with someone. So, all
Amazing.
right.
Thank
Well,
you so much.
yeah, awesome. Thank you so much again, and take care. And we'll
Take care,
chat again
Ryan.
soon. All
Bye bye.
right. Bye bye.